The blind date hadn't even ordered appetizers when she laughed. Not a polite chuckle, a full loud laugh that made every head in the restaurant turn. "You're joking, right?" Victoria stood up, her eyes scanning his maintenance uniform with undisguised contempt. She shook her head and walked away, still laughing like she'd just escaped a bad prank. Frank didn't chase her, didn't explain. He simply placed cash on the table and sat in silence. But she had no idea that in less than 24 hours in this very building, chaos would erupt, and the only person capable of saving everyone would be the black single dad she had just humiliated. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from today. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this ends. Now, to understand what happened that night, we need to go back to that morning. The alarm rang at 5:45, same as every other day. Frank was already awake, lying still in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of the apartment, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic outside, the soft breathing from the room next door. He got up, stretched his shoulders, and walked to his daughter's bedroom. Sophia was 7 years old, and like most 7-year-olds, she treated mornings like a personal enemy. "Sophia, time to get up." No response. Just a small body burrowing deeper under the blankets. Frank smiled and leaned against the doorframe. "All right then, rocket launch sequence initiated. 10, 9, 8. A muffled groan came from under the covers. 7, 6, 5. "Dad, no." 4, 3, 2. Sophia shot up, hair-wild eyes barely open. I'm up. No rocket launch." Frank laughed, a warm sound that filled the small room. "Good morning, astronaut." He helped her get ready, picking out clothes while she brushed her teeth, then sat her down to do her hair. Sophia had inherited her mother's curls, thick, beautiful, and absolutely uncooperative in the mornings. Frank had learned to manage them over the years, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he worked through the tangles. While he braided, Sophia's small fingers traced a long scar on his forearm. The skin there was raised and slightly discolored, running from his wrist almost to his elbow. "Daddy, where did this come from?" Frank didn't stop braiding. "From when Daddy used to work somewhere very far away." "How far?" "Very far. Across the ocean." Sophia seemed satisfied with that answer, the way children often are when adults speak of distant, mysterious things. She didn't ask more, and Frank didn't offer more. Some stories weren't meant for 7-year-olds. Over breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, the same as every Saturday. Sophia looked up from her plate with suspicious eyes. "Why do you have to work today? It's the weekend." "Big event at the building. They need extra hands." "And tonight?" Frank took a sip of coffee, avoiding her gaze. "Tonight I have a meeting." "A meeting." Sophia drew out the word, grinning. "Is it a date?" "It's a meeting." "It's a date? Daddy has a date." Frank shook his head, but he couldn't hide the small smile tugging at his lips. It had been years since he'd agreed to anything like this. His co-worker Dave had set it up, insisted that Frank needed to get back out there. Frank had resisted for a long time, but eventually he'd said yes. Just once. Just to try. They drove to the Meridian, the luxury complex where Frank worked as a systems technician. The building was a towering monument to wealth, hotel, restaurant, event spaces, all wrapped in glass and steel. Frank had been maintaining its systems for 3 years now. He knew every wire, every pipe, every emergency exit. Since the regular babysitter was off for the weekend, Sophia would spend the day in the children's play area on the 2nd floor. On event weekends, the play area stayed open until 9 in the evening to accommodate staff members who had to work late. It wasn't ideal, but the staff there knew Sophia well, and Frank could check on her throughout his shift. As they walked through the lobby, Frank noticed the increased activity. Workers were setting up decorations, arranging flowers, rolling in equipment. A large banner hung near the main event hall displaying the face of a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, Senator Richard Caldwell. Annual charity gala. Tonight. Frank stopped walking, his eyes fixed on the banner for a moment, something unreadable passing across his face. Then he blinked, and it was gone. "Daddy, you okay?" He looked down at Sophia and nodded. "Yeah, baby. Just thinking." He dropped her off at the play area, kneeling down to her level. "Remember the rules." Sophia recited them like a pledge. "If there's an alarm, find the nearest exit. Don't run against the crowd. Wait for you at the meeting point." "That's my girl." He kissed her forehead and watched her run off to join the other children before heading to the maintenance office. Dave was already there, grinning like he knew a secret. "Big night tonight, huh?" Frank grabbed his tool belt. "It's just dinner." "Dinner with Victoria Caldwell." Dave whistled low. "You know who her uncle is, right? The senator himself. Man, she's way out of your league." Frank didn't respond, just clipped the radio to his belt. I'm kidding," Dave said, holding up his hands. "But seriously, she's supposed to be something else. Smart, successful, gorgeous. Don't mess it up." The day passed in its usual rhythm of work, checking systems, fixing minor issues, coordinating with other staff. But throughout the day, Frank found his eyes drifting to the windows, to the exits, to the emergency panels. A habit. An old habit from a life he no longer lived. When he drove, his eyes scanned the rearview mirror every few seconds. Not because of traffic, just because. Some things you never unlearn. That evening, Frank finished his shift but didn't have time to go home and change. He'd asked the restaurant manager earlier if it was all right to come in his work clothes, navy blue uniform, name tag, steel-toed boots. The manager, who had known Frank for years, had agreed without hesitation. Victoria Caldwell arrived at 7 sharp. She was exactly as Dave had described, elegant, polished, wearing a dress that probably cost more than Frank's monthly rent. Her hair was perfect. Her makeup was perfect. Everything about her screamed money and status. She spotted him at the table and walked over, her smile bright and practiced. Then her eyes traveled down to his uniform, and the smile began to fade. "You're Frank." He stood up politely. "That's right. Thank you for coming." Victoria's gaze lingered on the name tag stitched onto his chest. "You work maintenance here." "Systems technician. I've been here for 3 years." For a moment, she just stared at him. Then she laughed. Not a polite social laugh. A real laugh, loud and sharp, the kind that turned heads throughout the restaurant. "I'm sorry," she said, though she didn't sound sorry at all. "I think there's been some kind of mistake." She turned and walked away, still laughing, the sound echoing off the high ceilings as she disappeared through the front door. Frank stood there, aware of the eyes on him. A couple at a nearby table whispered to each other. A server looked at him with something like pity. He sat back down slowly. His hand gripped the edge of the chair knuckles tight, just for a second. Then he released it. He called the server over, paid for the table, even though nothing had been ordered, and left a generous tip. Then he walked out of the restaurant with his head held high. On his way to pick up Sophia, Frank passed by the technical room. Old habits. He decided to do a quick check before leaving. What he found made him stop cold. A gas valve that should have been sealed was slightly loose. The fire alarm panel showed intermittent signal interference, and the emergency exit near the main event hall, the one that would be crucial if anything went wrong during tomorrow's gala, had been locked using the wrong override code, which meant it wouldn't open properly in an emergency. Frank found the night shift manager, a younger man named Kevin, who always seemed more interested in his phone than his job. "We've got problems in the system," Frank said. "The gas valve, the alarms, the emergency exits, they need to be fixed tonight." Kevin barely looked up. "It can wait until tomorrow. We're slammed with prep for the senator's event." "That's exactly why it can't wait. If something happens during the gala..." "You're a technician, not a safety inspector." Kevin's voice was dismissive. "Go home. Enjoy your weekend. We'll handle it." Frank wanted to argue. Every instinct told him to push harder, but he also knew how this worked. He was just the maintenance guy. His warnings would be filed away and forgotten. Instead, he pulled out his phone and quietly photographed every issue he'd found. Then he went back to the office and typed up a detailed email report, sending it to building management with a timestamp. If something went wrong, at least there would be a record. He picked up Sophia from the play area. She was tired, but happy, chattering about the games she'd played and the friends she'd made. In the car, she looked over at him. "How was your date?" Frank kept his eyes on the road. "Not a match." Sophia reached over and took his hand. "That's okay, Daddy. You still have me." Frank squeezed her small fingers and smiled. "Yeah, baby, I still have you." They drove home through the evening traffic, leaving the Meridian behind. But Frank couldn't shake the feeling in his gut, the same feeling he used to get before things went wrong in places far away from here. He pushed it down and focused on the road ahead. Tomorrow was another day. The next morning, Frank woke before the alarm again. The uneasy feeling from the night before hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown stronger overnight, settling into his bones like an old ache. He went through the morning routine with Sophia the rocket countdown, the hair braiding the scrambled eggs. But his mind kept drifting back to the Meridian, to the loose valve, the faulty alarms, the improperly locked exits. "Daddy, you're not listening." Frank blinked and looked down at his daughter. "Sorry, baby. What did you say?" "I said, can we get ice cream after you finish work?" "We'll see. Depends on how the day goes." Sophia accepted this with the wisdom of a child who had learned that "we'll see" usually meant yes if she behaved well enough. Since it was Sunday and her school was closed, Sophia would be spending another day at the Meridian's play area. Frank didn't love the arrangement, but he had no other choice. Single parenthood meant constant improvisation. When they arrived at the complex, the activity had doubled from the day before. The charity gala was tonight, and every staff member seemed to be running in a different direction. Florists arranged massive centerpieces. Caterers wheeled in carts of food. Security personnel checked credentials at every entrance. Frank walked Sophia to the second floor, holding her hand as they navigated through the chaos. At the entrance to the play area, he knelt down to her level. "Remember what we talked about?" Sophia nodded seriously. "If there's an alarm, find the nearest exit. Don't run against the crowd. Wait for you at the meeting point outside. And if the door won't open, stay calm. Find an adult. Don't panic." Frank pulled her into a hug. "You're the bravest girl I know. I learned from you, Daddy." He watched her run inside, waving at the staff member on duty, before disappearing among the other children. Then he headed to the maintenance office, his jaw tight. The first thing he did was check his email. His report from last night had been marked as read, but there was no response, no acknowledgement, no action items, just silence. He found Dave in the break room nursing a coffee. "Did anyone do anything about the issues I flagged last night?" Dave shrugged. "Kevin said he passed it up the chain. Management decided it wasn't urgent enough to delay the gala prep." Frank felt his hands clench at his sides. "Not urgent. The emergency exits." "Look, man, I hear you." Dave held up a hand. "But today's not the day to push it. Senator Caldwell is coming personally. Everyone's on edge. Just keep your head down and get through the shift." Frank wanted to argue, but he knew it wouldn't change anything. He grabbed his tool belt and headed out to do his rounds, checking every system he could access, making mental notes of everything that still needed fixing. Late that afternoon, he was in the basement checking electrical panels when the first sign of trouble appeared. The lights flickered. Not the normal flicker of an old bulb, but a rhythmic pulse that ran through the entire floor. Frank looked up, watching the pattern repeat 3 times before stabilizing. He pulled out his radio. "Control room, this is Frank. I'm seeing power fluctuations in basement level 2. Anyone else reporting issues?" Static. Then a distracted voice. "Copy that. We're getting some weird readings up here, too. Probably just the extra load from the event setup. We'll monitor it." Frank didn't believe that for a second. He headed upstairs, moving faster now. On the main floor, the event space was nearly ready. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Round tables covered in white linens filled the room. A stage had been set up at the far end, complete with podium and massive screens displaying the senator's campaign logo. And everywhere staff members rushed around, making last-minute adjustments, completely unaware of the danger lurking in the walls around them. Frank found the event manager, a woman named Patricia, who had been coordinating the gala for months. She was barking orders into a headset when he approached. "We need to talk about the building systems." Patricia held up a finger, finished her conversation, then turned to him with barely concealed impatience. "What is it?" "The power fluctuations we're seeing aren't from the event load. Something's wrong with the main electrical system. Combined with the issues I reported last night, the gas valve, the fire alarms, the emergency exits, we could be looking at a serious situation." "A serious situation." Patricia repeated the words like they were a foreign language. "The senator arrives in 2 hours. We have over 100 guests coming tonight, VIP's donors press. The governor might make an appearance. This event has been planned for 8 months. None of that will matter if something goes wrong and people can't get out." Patricia's eyes hardened. "Mr. Thompson, I appreciate your concern, but you're a maintenance technician, not a safety engineer. We have protocols. We have inspections. Everything has been approved. The approvals were based on systems that were working properly. I'm telling you right now, those systems are compromised." Before Patricia could respond, another voice cut in from behind them. "Is there a problem here?" Frank turned. Victoria Caldwell stood a few feet away, dressed in an elegant pantsuit, her hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She must have arrived early to help prepare for her uncle's arrival. Her eyes met Frank's, and for a split second something flickered across her face, recognition, perhaps embarrassment. Then it was gone, replaced by cold indifference. "No problem at all, Miss Caldwell," Patricia said smoothly. "Just a minor technical concern, nothing that will affect tonight's event." Victoria's gaze lingered on Frank for another moment. Then she turned away as if he were invisible, walking off to inspect the flower arrangements. Patricia looked at Frank with a thin smile. "I think we're done here." Frank stood his ground for another second, then walked away. There was nothing more he could do. He had warned them. He had documented everything. If they wouldn't listen, then all he could do was be ready when things went wrong. He just hoped he was wrong about all of it. He wasn't. 30 minutes later, the situation spiraled out of control. It started with a strange smell, something acrid and chemical drifting through the ventilation system. Then the lights flickered again, longer this time, and when they came back on, they were dimmer, casting the event space in an unsettling half-light. Then came the smoke. It poured from the vents near the ceiling, dark gray wisps that quickly thickened into opaque clouds. The fire alarm shrieked to life, its piercing wail echoing off the walls. And then came the panic. Staff members who had been calmly setting tables moments ago now ran in every direction. Early arriving guests, about 60 people who had come for the pre-event reception, along with dozens of staff members, screamed and pushed toward the exits. The main emergency doors, the ones Frank had warned about, refused to open. People slammed against them, pulled at the handles, but they wouldn't budge. Frank was across the building when he heard the alarm. He dropped everything and ran toward the event space, his heart pounding in his chest. When he arrived, he found chaos. Patricia stood frozen near the stage, her headset dangling from her hand, her face pale with shock. Security guards tried to direct people, but their voices were lost in the screaming. Smoke continued to pour from the vents, growing thicker by the second. And in the middle of the crowd, Frank saw Victoria get knocked to the ground as panicked guests rushed past her. She cried out, but no one stopped to help. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. Frank had seen this before. Different setting, different people, but the same fundamental truth: when fear takes over, humans become a stampede, and stampedes kill. He moved. His voice cut through the chaos like a blade, not loud, but somehow penetrating every corner of the room. "Everybody stop!" And incredibly impossibly they did. Something in his tone, in his posture, in the absolute certainty of his command, it reached into the primitive part of their brains and overrode their panic. For just a moment, over 100 people became a unit, all looking at the man in the maintenance uniform. Frank didn't waste that moment. You, and you, he pointed at 3 security guards. Take positions at the north, south, and east corners. No one moves until I say. The guards hesitated for only a second before moving to obey. Everyone else listen carefully. The main exits are compromised, but there are secondary exits throughout the building. We're going to evacuate in groups calmly and efficiently. Anyone who runs, anyone who pushes you, put everyone at risk. He began dividing the crowd into sections, assigning each section to a specific staff member with instructions on which route to take. His commands were precise, specific, delivered without hesitation. Group 1, follow the blue emergency signs to exit B3. Group 2, the service corridor behind the kitchen leads to the loading dock. Group 3, there's a stairwell on the east side that goes directly to the parking garage. A security guard, a tall man with a military-style haircut and sharp eyes, approached Frank as he directed the evacuation. "You've done this before," the man said quietly. It wasn't a question. Frank didn't look at him. "Frank Wright, former Marine." Frank nodded, surprised. "How did you—" "The way you stand. The way you assess the room." Frank finally met his eyes. "I need you on the west corridor. Make sure no one goes back inside for any reason." "Copy that." Frank started to move, then stopped. "What branch?" "Army, long time ago." "Figured. You've got that look." There was no time for more conversation. Frank moved out, and Frank continued coordinating his mind, running through building schematics, calculating exit capacities, adjusting plans on the fly. Somewhere in the middle of it all, he helped Victoria to her feet. She stared at him with wide eyes, her earlier contempt replaced by something else entirely, confusion, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. "Follow Group 2, he told her. "Service corridor loading dock, go." She opened her mouth as if to say something, but he had already turned away, moving to the next crisis. The evacuation was proceeding smoothly when Frank's radio crackled. "Frank, this is Jenny from the play area. We have a problem." His blood went cold. "The kids are stuck. Exit C7 won't open and smoke is starting to come through the vents. There are 8 children in here, including Sophia." For one terrible second, the world stopped. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to abandon everything and get to his daughter. She was all he had left. She was everything. But around him, dozens of people were still mid-evacuation. Without coordination, the careful order he had established would collapse. People would panic. People would get hurt. People would die. Frank closed his eyes, breathed. When he opened them again, his voice was steady. "Jenny, keep the children calm. Cover their mouths with wet cloth if you have it. I'm sending someone." He found Frank, who had just returned from securing the west corridor. "Children's play area, 2nd floor. Exit C7 is locked, but it can be opened manually from outside. There's a panel on the left side of the doorframe. Override code is 7742. Can you handle it?" Frank's eyes were serious. "Consider it done." "Frank." Frank grabbed his arm. "My daughter is in there, 7 years old. Her name is Sophia." Something passed between them, an understanding that needed no words. "I'll bring her out myself," Frank said. "You have my word." Then he was gone, sprinting toward the stairs. Frank wanted to follow. Every fiber of his being wanted to follow. But instead, he turned back to the evacuation, pushing down the fear, channeling it into focus. "Group 4, you're next. Stay low, the smoke is thinner near the floor. Move." The next 20 minutes were a blur of commands, adjustments, and barely controlled chaos. Frank moved through it all like a machine directing traffic-solving problems, keeping the evacuation on track. And then just when it seemed like the worst was over, the building's PA system crackled with an automated warning. "Attention! Main door system failure imminent. All personnel evacuate immediately." Frank understood instantly what that meant. The central control system was failing. When it went, all the electronic locks in the building would engage simultaneously, a safety feature designed to contain fires that would instead trap anyone still inside. He found the building manager, a sweating man named Gerald, who looked like he was about to pass out. "How many people are still inside?" Gerald shook his head helplessly. "I don't know. Maybe 30, 40. "Where's the manual override for the main system?" "Central control room. Basement level 1. But it's completely filled with smoke down there. The fire started somewhere in the electrical system." Frank was already moving. "What's the emergency activation code?" "What you can't go down there, you'll die." Frank stopped and turned his eyes boring into Gerald's. "The code. Now." Gerald stammered out a sequence of numbers. Frank repeated them once, committing them to memory, then headed for the basement stairs. The stairwell was already thick with smoke, visibility dropping with every step down. Frank pulled off his uniform jacket, ripped a sleeve, soaked it in water from an emergency sprinkler, and tied it around his nose and mouth. Then he descended into darkness. The basement was hell, smoke so thick he could barely see his own hands, heat radiating from the walls. Every breath felt like inhaling fire even through the wet cloth. But Frank kept moving. He didn't need to see. He had memorized this building over 3 years of maintenance work. 52 steps from the stairwell to the control room door. Turn left at the 3rd support beam. The control panel was mounted on the south wall 4 feet off the ground. A voice echoed in his mind, not his own, but one from long ago. A sergeant who had trained him in conditions far worse than this. "When you can't see, trust your training. Your body remembers what your mind forgets." His hands found the door handle. He pulled it open and stumbled into the control room. The panel was where he remembered it. His fingers moved across the buttons, muscle memory taking over. He punched in the emergency code Gerald had given him. For a horrible moment, nothing happened. Then somewhere above him, he heard the sound of locks disengaging, doors opening, people crying out in relief as they found their way to safety. Frank sagged against the wall, coughing violently, his lungs burning from the smoke. He had to get out. The wet cloth was drying out. His vision was starting to blur. He found the door, then the wall, then the support beams, counting steps, ignoring the pain, focusing only on the next movement, the next breath. The stairwell seemed endless. Each step upward was a battle. His body screamed at him to stop, to rest, to give in. But somewhere above him, Sophia was waiting. He wouldn't stop. Not until he saw her again. When he burst through the door into the lobby, the fresh air hit him like a physical force. He doubled over, gasping, coughing up black smoke. People around him stepped back, staring. His face was covered in soot. His clothes were scorched. He looked like he had walked through fire itself. And then slowly, he straightened up. He was still standing. Frank made his way to the designated meeting point outside the building, the fountain plaza on the east side, away from the emergency vehicles now flooding the main entrance. His legs felt like lead, his lungs still burning with every breath, but he kept moving. The plaza was crowded with evacuees, staff members, and confused guests still in their gala attire. Fire trucks and ambulances lined the street, their lights painting everything in flashes of red and blue. Paramedics moved through the crowd, checking for injuries, handing out oxygen masks. Frank scanned the faces, searching for the only one that mattered. "Daddy." The voice cut through the chaos like a bell. Frank turned and saw Sophia running toward him, her small legs pumping, her face streaked with tears, but very much alive. He dropped to his knees just as she crashed into him, her arms wrapping around his neck with surprising strength for such a small body. Frank held her tight, one hand cradling the back of her head, his eyes squeezed shut against the tears threatening to fall. "I did what you said," Sophia sobbed into his shoulder. "I remembered all the rules. I told the other kids not to be scared." Frank pulled back just enough to look at her face. "You were so brave, baby. I'm so proud of you." Frank appeared behind Sophia, slightly out of breath but wearing a small smile. She wasn't kidding. When I got there, she had all the other kids sitting in a line by the door, calm as could be. Told them her daddy was coming to save everyone. Frank stood up, Sophia still clinging to his hand. He extended his other hand to Frank. Thank you for keeping your word. Frank shook it firmly. Thank you for keeping all of us alive. Around them, the truth of what had happened was beginning to spread. People pointed at Frank, whispered to each other. The man in the maintenance uniform. The one who had taken control when everyone else fell apart. The one who had walked into the smoke and somehow walked back out. A commotion near the main entrance drew everyone's attention. A black SUV had pulled up, flanked by security vehicles. The door opened and Senator Richard Caldwell stepped out, his face tight with concern. He had arrived too late for the gala, but just in time to witness the aftermath. Aides surrounded him, immediately briefing him on the situation. Frank watched from a distance, keeping Sophia close. He had no desire to be part of whatever political theater was about to unfold. But then Caldwell's eyes swept across the crowd, and they landed on Frank. The senator went still. His aides kept talking, but he wasn't listening anymore. He was staring at Frank with an expression that shifted from confusion to disbelief to recognition. Caldwell pushed past his aides and walked directly toward Frank. The crowd parted for him instinctively, creating a path between the senator and the soot-covered maintenance worker. I know you. Frank didn't respond. He just stood there holding his daughter's hand, waiting. Caldwell stopped a few feet away, studying Frank's face, as if trying to match it to a memory from long ago. Then his eyes widened. Frank Thompson. Staff Sergeant Frank Thompson. The senator's voice was barely above a whisper. Kandahar, 2015. You were the one who led the extraction team when my nephew was taken. A murmur rippled through the crowd. People exchanged confused glances, trying to reconcile the man in the dirty uniform with the soldier the senator was describing. Frank finally spoke, his voice quiet. That was a long time ago, Senator. A different life. You saved his life. You saved 3 other hostages. You carried my nephew on your back for 6 miles through hostile territory with a bullet wound in your leg. Caldwell's voice cracked slightly. I tried to find you afterward, to thank you properly, but you had already left the service, disappeared. I had my reasons. Caldwell glanced down at Sophia, then back at Frank. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Your wife. I heard what happened. I'm sorry. Frank said nothing. Some wounds weren't meant to be discussed in public. The senator shook his head slowly, almost in disbelief. All these years you've been here, working maintenance in a building I visit twice a year, and you never said anything, never asked for anything. I don't need anything from you, Senator. I never did. I was just doing my job then, same as I'm doing my job now. From somewhere in the crowd, Victoria had been watching the entire exchange. She stood frozen among the other evacuees, her face pale, her eyes fixed on Frank. This was the man she had laughed at, the man she had dismissed as beneath her, the man whose only crime was wearing a work uniform to a dinner date. This was the man who had just saved her life. She stepped forward, moving through the crowd until she stood near her uncle. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. What could she possibly say? What apology could undo the cruelty of that laugh, the casual contempt in her voice when she had walked away? Frank looked at her for a moment. Just a moment. There was no anger in his eyes, no satisfaction, no desire for vindication, just the steady gaze of a man who had long ago stopped caring what people like her thought of him. Then he turned back to Sophia. Come on, sweetheart. It's late. Let's go home. He started walking toward the parking garage, his daughter's hand in his. Wait. Victoria's voice was small, uncertain. I need to... Frank stopped but didn't turn around. You don't need to do anything, Ms. Caldwell. We're strangers. Let's keep it that way. He kept walking, leaving Victoria standing there with the weight of her own choices pressing down on her shoulders. For the first time in her life, she understood what it felt like to be dismissed, and she understood that she had earned it. Senator Caldwell watched Frank go, his expression unreadable. Then he called out, his voice carrying across the plaza. "Staff Sergeant Thompson." Frank stopped. This time he turned around. Caldwell straightened his posture, and then in front of his aides, his security team, the press cameras that had begun arriving, and hundreds of witnesses, the United States Senator raised his hand in a sharp military salute. "Thank you for your service, then and now." The plaza went silent. Everyone watched, waiting to see what Frank would do. For a long moment, he just stood there, Sophia looking up at him with curious eyes. Then slowly, he gave a single nod, not a salute, but an acknowledgement. One man recognizing another. It was enough. Frank turned and walked away, Sophia skipping slightly to keep up with his longer strides. Daddy, who was that man? Just someone I met a long time ago. He seemed important. Maybe to some people. They reached the parking garage, found their car, an older sedan with a few dents and a lot of miles on it. Frank buckled Sophia into the back seat, then slid behind the wheel. As he started the engine, his eyes drifted to the rearview mirror, the old habit checking for threats, assessing the environment. But this time, instead of scanning for danger, he found himself looking at Sophia in the back seat. Her eyes were already drooping, the exhaustion of the day finally catching up to her. "Daddy." "Yeah, baby." "Are you a hero?" Frank considered the question as he pulled out of the garage, leaving the Meridian behind. "No, sweetheart. I'm just your dad." Sophia smiled sleepily. "That's okay. You're my hero anyway." Frank felt something loosen in his chest, a knot he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. He smiled, the first real smile since the chaos had begun. "Ice cream tomorrow?" "You promised," Sophia mumbled, already half asleep. "I did, didn't I?" They drove through the evening streets, past the flashing lights and the gathering news vans, past the building where everything had changed and nothing had changed at all. Frank was still a maintenance technician, still a single father, still a man in a worn uniform driving a beat-up car. But somewhere behind them, a senator was telling reporters about a hero who had refused recognition. A crowd was recounting stories of the man who had walked into smoke and walked out again. A woman was replaying the worst moment of her life and wondering if she would ever be able to look at herself the same way. And Frank just drove home, his daughter asleep in the back seat, the rearview mirror, reflecting nothing but the quiet road ahead. Some men needed the world to know their worth. Frank Thompson only needed one 7-year-old girl to call him dad. That was enough. It had always been enough. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe. There are more stories like this one coming soon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.